Good morning. Great to have you here and welcome to our sustainability webinar. My name is Erica van Leeuwen, Managing Director of the Sydney team and Managing Partner InSites Consulting, and I'll be moderating today's session. Before we start, in the spirit of reconciliation, InSites Consulting acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This session is being recorded and you'll receive it following the sessions, likely by Friday. If you have questions, please use the question panel, which you can find on the right-hand side of your screen. And I'd like to start by asking you all, how do we make sustainability convenient? This is at the heart of our challenge. For many years, as leaders of brands, we've surfed on convenience, and now we need to find new ways. Sustainability matters. In 2021, we revised our company purpose, which you can now see on the screen. This included an important focus on sustainability. It is at the heart of what we seek to achieve with our people and our clients today. Without taking action, the data suggests that the Australian economy could contract by 6% or $3.4 trillion by 2070, while the right steps could add $700 billion. Climate change is here, and we all need to think through actions we might take to mitigate the risks. But for most of us, we know that we will have to fundamentally transform our operating models. So what's on your mind? What's holding you back? Please use the chat, ask your questions. We'll definitely have time to answer them. Understanding how consumers feel about sustainability and how brands can innovate is an area we've been working in for the last 2 to 3 years, inspired by our own research across the globe and in Australia, and also with in-depth interviews that Joeri has conducted with leading brand owners and sustainability leaders across the globe. So with this in mind, it's my great pleasure to introduce Joeri, who stayed up very late for us again, to share his latest reflections on the last 2 years of data, enhanced by the in-depth conversation he's been conducting across the globe. As we share, please put your questions in the chat. It's now just past 9:03. Joeri will share his thinking for about 1 hour and 15 minutes, leaving us plenty of time for questions. We will finish at 10:30 a.m. Over to you, Joeri.
Thanks, Erica. Good morning, everyone in Australia down under. I hope you're all feeling good, but I will ask you that later on, because the main idea is, despite the time zone difference and the time lag between here, Europe and Australia, and also the remote way of working, of which we're getting more and more used to these days. I wanted to make it a bit more interactive by using this polling tool. And you can use the polling tool if you scan the QR code you see on the screen with your camera app. Or if you don't know how that works, then you can also just use the URL poll.com hashtag or slash, sorry, not hashtag, /Joeri. And then you should come to a page where the first question that I'm asking you is how you are feeling today, this morning over there in Australia. I can already see some answers popping in, and I'm glad that up till now most of them are in the green part of this chart, as you can see. That's really good news, because it's not the case for everyone, and I will come back to seeing how you feel later on, so keep voting. One of the new stress sources we see worldwide is what psychologists call eco-anxiety. And to give you an idea of what eco-anxiety is and how you can treat it, this is a very recent commercial of an energy provider in Europe. It's in Swedish, but there are some subtitles.
Den här typen av frågor bottnar ofta i ett existentiellt ifrågasättande. Vem är jag? Det är väl så du tänker?
Mm. So really on trend, you could say Vattenfall, or Vattenfall, it is in Swedish. I like this Swedish language because it always reminds me of my childhood and the Muppet Show, the Swedish cooking in the Muppet Show. It's such a nice language. They created this engineerapy instead of therapy, in which you could actually book a 20-minute slot with one of the engineers working for Vattenfall, which is the Swedish word, by the way, for waterfall. And as a European energy provider, they are switching and transforming into becoming, of course, a more climate positive or climate neutral energy provider and fossil-free living. And they're promising that they will offer fossil-free living within one generation. And you can see their pathway. Today, they're not CO2 neutral yet, but they're promising to do it for by the next generation. They will become climate neutral at least, and hopefully climate positive. Coming back to the anxiety, it is real. It's not a joke. It is a real new feeling, it's not yet a disorder, you could say. But at least there are some people that because of climate change, they suffer from panic attacks, obsessive thinking, loss of appetite, and insomnia. And to be honest, I think that in Australia, there will be a lot of eco-anxiety because in the past months and years, you didn't only have to cope with the very dry summers and the wildfires, but after that also the floods. So I think Australia, being positioned that part of the planet, is one of the regions that really sees the effect of climate change and the environmental situation. So that might lead to worrying. And in our research, we asked the Australian consumers and citizens some statements like this one. And more than 60%, more than 6 out of 10 Australians said, I'm worried that the Australian government is not doing enough to limit climate change and what is happening around us. So yes, they are worried. And from worrying, the next step to that is worrying, which is very close to it. And at first we only saw it with students skipping school in the climate strikes. You could say it was before COVID, but that's not really the case in May this year in Australia, but also just a couple of weeks ago in November during the Glasgow summit. You could saw this type of events and protests. I'm not sure if you know the logo. These are the Extinction Rebellions protesting. And you can see that they were using this quite graphical visuals of a koala that is burning and that is suffering, referring to the 60,000 koalas actually and the loss of biodiversity because of the bushfires and the heat waves in Australia, which are a direct effect, of course, of climate change. So more worrying, more protesting, more activists, more consumer voices. It means that companies at least should also react and brands should also react to this, because there's a frustration, that's eco-anxiety, that government is not doing enough, I think, and consumers also think in that way that big companies have an impact that can be much bigger than what the government is doing today. Although it would be better if the government would do more, of course, on a legal part. Some examples of brands that are, of course, more linked to sustainability, like Patagonia, for instance, which is a very well-known US outdoor brand. they are actually supporting the strikes by allowing their employees to march during the global climate strikes. So they were shutting down the stores so that their employees could participate in the climate action, because to them, of course, sustainability is part of the brand DNA. And exceptionally, they even paid for advertising in the strike cities, New York, Washington, and Denver, to engage other people also to participate in the climate actions, and even send texts to the government to do more actions and make the world a greater place again, you could say. And this is, of course, a bit referring to Greta Thunberg. So let's have a look again at the results of the poll. Up till now, there's someone feeling not that well. Maybe it's because I'm talking a bit too much about koalas and the wildfires in Australia or the floods. But I hope you will feel better after the presentation. Coming back to the data we've collected in Australia, today, there's more than 8 out of 10 of your consumers, of your target groups, that find sustainability important. And we did a study, as Erica has mentioned, before the whole Corona crisis, and then afterwards. And you can see that one of the fears was that because there was a new crisis, which was more about health and hygiene and protection against viruses, that the whole sustainability topic would be on a lower rank in the consumer's mind. But when we look at our data, that's totally not the case. The contrary is actually the case, as you can see, because the number of people that really find it important has been growing. And 7 out of 10 Australians are concerned about wasting natural resources, of course, also an effect of the dry summers and the floods, and see climate change as a serious concern, as serious as the COVID-19 crisis, which means a lot, because we have all been suffering 2 years by now from what is happening around us in the world. Now, to be honest, I think it is even more serious than COVID-19, because hopefully, in the end, the virus will mitigate and transfer into just another cold, you could say, or another flu. But that's not the case with climate change, of course. It's there to stay. And one way of checking how the planet is doing, because you could think maybe it's already going better because of the lockdowns, and we cannot travel intercontinentally, for instance. There's less travel, there's more remote working. Well, I'm afraid I have bad news. This is the Earth Overshoot Day in 2021, full COVID crisis. And as you can see, in Australia, Earth Overshoot Day, so the day on which we've used up all the natural resources, was already on March 22, which means that if everyone would live like an Australian, we would need more than 4.5 planets to cater for all the needs of Australians living globally. But of course, not everyone is an Australian. And I'm taking Australia as an example, but I'm a Belgian. You can see that Belgium is just below Australia, just 1 week after Australia. So this is, even lockdowns are not helping us to solve the climate change problem. One reason why we are in this situation is that for a long time we've been looking at sustainability. We've been talking about sustainability since the end of the 70s, start of the 80s. But it was also always defined as doing less harm for the planet, which is a bit too late, to be honest, if you look at what is happening today. Even John Elkington, who is the CSR expert, who created this model that has been used for over 20 years, the definition of sustainability, according to him, back then was that it's a combination of the 3 Ps. It's also called the triple bottom line model. Sustainable is when you do better for your profits, but also better for people and better for the planet. And if you do that, you are in a sustainable business. Now, John Elkington himself, as a thought leader, 20 years after creating this model, he said, I was actually wrong. And this model is it's not a good model, which is strange because I don't know many thought leaders that recall their own model. Usually it's car manufacturers who do it when the brakes are not working or the autopilot gives some problems in your Tesla. But a thought leader doing that, it's exceptional. Now he said, I am recalling the model because the fact that I said it should be better also for the profits has given an alibi to many companies not to invest in the long term in sustainability, because it was easy to say, yeah, this is better for the planet, but it leads to less profits this year, so let's not do it because it's not sustainable. And he said, John Elkington said that was actually wrong in my model, because when you look at what sustainability can mean for companies and for business life, we should have a new concept. And of course, he launched a new concept along with a new book as well, which is called Green Swans. I'm not sure if you were able to read it, but I can recommend it. I will give you some more recommendations on literature. And don't worry, I won't mention all the books here that you can see in the background. But this book is really interesting because he says, you know, the concept of black swans, right? Black swans is something unexpectedly happens, and it changes everything. It's a crisis. It can be a financial crisis. At a certain point, we thought Corona was a black swan as well, and maybe it is a black swan for many companies, although it was predicted that there would be viruses like that. So normally a black swan is unpredicted and has an effect on the economy, on life, on everything. Now, John Elkington says, what is a green swan? A green swan is actually an innovation. It can be a startup, it can be a big company that comes up with something new that is green, of course, that is eco-friendly, and that leads to a transformation in a positive way, not in a negative way like a black swan. Now, in order to find these green swans, he says, we are talking about regenerative capitalism. So restoring, regenerating, replenishing what we have lost in the past 30 to 50 years already since the mass industrialization and customization. And that means we should rethink the way we're living to passive homes, but also the way we're working together, the way we're creating businesses, and also how we're competing or not competing or collaborating with our competitors. Because one thing is for sure, every one of us in the same industry, in different industries, we're all facing the same challenges when it comes to CO2 emissions, to creating greener, more eco-friendly products or services. So it doesn't make sense to compete, but actually it makes more sense to collaborate and to use our powers together to change the world and to go for a better world. That makes sense, but it's not that easy as I can tell you that, because we're not used to working together with our competitors often. And it's good to see some initiatives like the Loop initiative, probably you know it, the Loop initiative, TerraCycle recycling organization working together with UPS, but also with 25 multinationals who are competitors, Nestle, Procter Gamble, Mars, that are creating durable containers for their products in a kind of milkman system. So refillable containers that are picked up by a UPS at your home. So quite convenient. Trying out, it's a test project together with some retailers across the globe to try out if it would really work and if it would really make sense for consumers. Now, and these are the last books. Now I will recommend another book, but these are two other books that I would like to recommend you if you're interested in what does it mean, regenerative? What does it really mean? What does it mean to become net positive instead of net zero? There are two big books. The first one on the left, Regen Leadership, but also the one to the right, it's a very recent one. It's created by Paul Polman, and that might ring a bell. He's the former CEO of Unilever. He was actually the CEO that transformed Unilever into a sustainable business, becoming more sustainable, becoming B Corp certified with Ben & Jerry's, for instance, and changing the way that it business. So this Net Positive book, I can also recommend it. And they're both about how can we create commerce, so capitalism, yes, it's not communism, but that is also benefiting for the planet and for climate. And we already see some changes, for instance, and often in the Nordics in Europe, they are known to be a bit more progressive. So from time to time, I will have some Swedish and Danish examples. Kalundborg, for instance, in Denmark is a new type of business park where they combine different industries and companies in a kind of circular system. And so these are 9 different businesses working together, using each other's water waste, for instance, or surplus energy to, in the end, create a system, a new system of doing business that is carbon negative instead of just carbon neutral. Now, one example from Australia in this regen thinking is Wide Open Agriculture, which is the leading regenerative food and agriculture company in Australia. They have different brands like Dirty Clean Food and Oat Up, for instance, all made from regenerative farming, but also promising that it's free from antibiotics, from hormones, that they're lowering CO2 emissions, taking care of biodiversity, and protecting the soil, which is a typical part of regen farming. I will come back to that later on. So up till now, we've been talking about sustainability in 2021. How is it changing? Well, it's changing from triple bottom line, doing less harm, to becoming positive for the planet, regenerating, replenishing, restoring. But the main question still is, how do Australian consumers look at this concept of sustainability? So we asked it to them in our research in Australia. We asked them, when we say sustainability, what pops up in your mind? And this is also the next question in the poll. You can still participate if you just logged in with this interactive poll by scanning the QR code on top of the screen or going to the URL poll.com/Joeri. That's my first name. And please use one word, because a word cloud will come from that, as you can see popping up right now. So what do you think that consumers understand by sustainability if we ask them in an open-ended question? And I can already see the first results with plastic, green, and environmental environment popping up as some interesting words. So keep responding, use one word that for you think consumers in Australia would say, this is sustainability for me. What we knew from our research, our qualitative research before we did the quant, was that often consumers are a bit confused when it comes to sustainability, because they see different terms on packaging, for instance. They see organic, they see we are a sustainable provider, but they also see labels like fair trade. And to them, it's quite complex. And often they confuse the different labels, and they also see it as one holistic concept, whereas it's totally different. Organic, which is all, or bio, natural, which is all related to the ingredients, often of food and beverage products, but also of cosmetics, for instance. It means no chemicals. So it is better for me, myself, my own health. But it doesn't mean if you're buying something organic that it's actually more sustainable. Often it can be the opposite, actually. It's not necessarily the case that organic is better for the planet when you look at how certain ingredients are grown. Now that's very complex for the consumer. For instance, they see bio vegetables or fruits in the supermarkets wrapped in a plastic packaging to keep it fresh for a longer time. But plastic to them, it harms the planet. So they don't see how eco-friendly, organic and plastic can go together. So it conflicts in their head. The same with fair trade. Fair trade, so not better for the planet, but actually better for society, better for the workers, well-being, fair wage. It's something different than made in a sustainable way or organic. But again, in a consumer's mind, it can be one holistic concept. So that's a challenge for us as brands to work on this concept. And offer, of course, most of us are involved with the different parts of sustainability, not only the better for the planet part. One of the interviews, I think Erica mentioned at the start in the introduction that we also did some expert interviews. And if you're interested in those, they brought in some quite brilliant case studies in the book scene that we will send you after this presentation. And one of the interviewees was Alan. Alan is the Chief Impact Officer and also the Head of Sustainability globally for Hewlett-Packard, HP. And as you can see, they're creating, of course, ink cartridges for printers that today are made with more than 40% of recycled plastics. They're even creating laptops, as you can see to the right of the slide, that are made from 80% of the plastics used is coming from recycled ocean plastics. So that's in the middle of the previous slide. It's about reducing single-use plastics, reducing sources, and creating something better for the planet. But it also, as you can see on the other pictures with the people in Haiti collecting the plastics from the oceans, it led to a social goal for HP as well, because they said, okay, we could collect plastics from the ocean in America, in our home market. But what if we would do it in Haiti, which is a developing country? We could create jobs in Haiti by organizing this recycling of plastics. And of course, I know the critic minds will say yes, because the labor cost is also lower in Haiti. That's true. So it's, in a certain sense, it is a win-win. They can collect plastics for a cheaper price, but they're also creating jobs in Haiti. By working together with an NGO, by the way, Bergh and Laverne, a plastic collector company. So they've used more than 35 million bottles, plastic bottles from the ocean since 2017. And they're increasing the capacity because they need more recycled plastics. And also installing washing factories in Haiti and creating more jobs in the end. So social and planet combined. And then it comes to, okay, but why should we invest in certain areas? And then there's two strategies, actually. On one hand, it can be a defensive shield. I mean, if you create something with plastics, you know that you cannot still create purely 100% single-use plastic products anymore. You should be involved with using recycled plastics. On the other hand, maybe you can also use sustainability claims as a differentiator from competition. I will give some examples throughout the presentation, but let's start with an Australian example. I like this toilet paper. It's direct to consumer, premium toilet paper. Who gives a crap? Nice brand name as well. And as you can see, they're using the three components of the sustainability definition again. So good for the world or better for the planet. They're B Corp certified, using recycled paper only. They're also good for your bum, as you can see, because they're not using chemicals, not using inks, dyes, or scents, but also then better for society or for people. And maybe that's really the differentiator from competition, because of course, most toilet paper brands are using recycled paper. There are other examples in certain markets that are saying we're not using chemicals or dyes or scents anymore. But what Who Gives a Crap is really doing is making a difference on the social element. 50% of all of the profits, which is a lot, goes to building toilets for people that in developing countries don't have access to clean toilets, which according to the brand is a number that's much higher than the number of people who have access to a mobile phone today. So that is really something. So half of the profits go to this type of charity, which is clearly a competitive differentiator for them. Let's have a look at what you were answering again in the poll, and you can still participate if you like. So what do you think Australian consumers see as their definition of sustainability? Top answers are environmental, you could say. So the middle of my slide, it's about recycling, about green, about the environment. But I can also see some other things like non-sacrificing, which could be broader than the planet. And someone said holistic. So really tapping into this idea, like it's not just the planet, it's about forever also, which has durability as well as sustainability. Now, these were the results of the poll. And as you, in Australia, so the top of mind associations, the top 10 ones. And as you can see, the number one was reducing food waste, which is, of course, a good one because it has a big effect. Everything that is food related is underestimated on the effect on the planet. We talk a lot about CO2 emissions, but of course, methane as a gas has a much bigger, like 8 times bigger effect on the planet and on the environment than CO2. So everything that's related with the meat industry and with the food industry has a big impact. Food waste is even worse. So you already are growing crops or feeding cows, which has a big effect. You need water for that. You need food for them. They are producing methane with the burps, more with the burps than with the other thing. But then when it's there in the stores, in the grocery stores, or in your fridge, and you don't eat it, you throw it away, then it's really a waste of the planet, not just a waste of your money. So food waste, it's really one of the more important parts of sustainability, which is also the first association in Australia. And luckily, we see some new innovations, like these smart labels, for instance, coming from the US, invisible labels. They are guiding people in doing fridge management, if you could call it like that with a big term. It helps you to see what I should eat sooner than other things in my fridge, because it's not just saying this is the expiry date, which we also know it's too early, but it is really with a sensor looking at what's inside the packaging and giving real-time advice on this you cannot eat anymore. Even if it's beyond the expiration date, it can still say you have to eat it soon. It's still okay to eat it, but you have to eat it soon. So it gives some advice on priorities in your fridge, you could say. Using food waste in upcycling, you could say, it's also a way of diving into this topic. And CSS and Kemin are working together. Kemin is a brand of pet food that is trying to create sustainable pet food by working together with CSS harvest-to-harvest technology. What they're doing is they're collecting and repurposing surplus food from supermarkets and transforming it into pet food in the end. So it's another example, an Australian example of how to work on this food waste thing. Let's dive a bit deeper into this graph, and we also see recycling programs. We had a chance to work together with Nestlé on this project, in which they temporarily switched their KitKat logo on the packaging with a recycle logo made from KitKat products to actually educate consumers, you could say, and ask them to recycle. And the main finding from the research which was brought into public, is that there is a big intention, a huge intention of Australians to recycle, to bin the waste correctly, but there is a lack of education on how to bin it correctly. For instance, with soft plastics, which is the wrapping of this product, many people are recycling it or binning it in the wrong bin. So this idea was on tapping into the main slogan of KitKat, have a break or take a break. They said, let's give the planet a break and recycle this packaging by binning it in the right bin. And working together with the retailer Coles, they had this bins in every Coles where you could recycle the packaging, and we're reminded on the packaging of the KitKats. Next into the list of the graphs is restoring and replenishing. We already talked about regenerative farming, and it's really becoming more important. I know it's not in the top 3 in Australia yet, but to me, if you look into the future, it will become one of the new topics, because this regenerative thinking, it's not just the CEO, ex-CEO, former CEO of Unilever talking about it, or John Elkington talking about it, but it's also continuously in the press. How can we protect our biodiversity? How can we protect our soils? But also, how can we empower farmers and at the same time promote animal welfare? So this is one of the things that is really the key of Danone with the One Planet, One Health strategy. They are moving into regenerative agriculture and farming. This is an example in the US, where they have 7 farms and about 7,000 cows in 5 states that are, the farms are in total for the entire supply chain from the farm to the table for dairy products, positive by 2025, carbon positive by 2025, by creating this clever farms and regenerative agriculture. So next in line are reducing CO2 emissions. And it's also becoming more important, as you can see, post-COVID, because to many people, the lockdowns we had, and we had some severe in Europe, but also in Australia for several months, made them revalue nature, as it was almost the only thing that we were still able to do. And also we felt the effect on the clean air in cities when there was less traffic and less commuting. So it's definitely also a topic that's becoming more important. The knowledge about the small particles in the air, for instance, and the effect on cancer and other health problems is becoming huge. And it means that consumers are really awake when it comes to this part of sustainability. Again, brands are already answering that. Ford, for instance, in the automotive sector, has created a new geofencing plug inside the hybrid vans that is automatically pushing your van into driving electrically on the battery whenever the van is entering a low emission zone in a city, or when it's entering a sensitive zone. It could be a hospital, it could be a school. Then the software of the car recognizes where you're driving and automatically pushes the car into CO2 neutral driving at that moment. Another example from Australia is this mobile provider Belong, which positioned itself as a carbon neutral provider. And they wanted to raise awareness among Australians about the effect of using your mobile or social media in general and data centers on the planet, and how much CO2 emissions it really emits. So what you could do is, using your mobile, you could test your own carbon thumbprint, thumb because you use your thumb to unlock your mobile phone instead of footprint. And it scanned what type of social media, what type of activities you're doing. You know, you can see that in your battery app on the mobile phone often, but they scanned this activity on a mobile phone, and then they said, this is your personal CO2 emission just by using your mobile every year, which is actually huge. And then they said, this is your impact if you're not with Belong. So you can say it is a differentiator from competition, because they really did a campaign on come to us and become a carbon neutral mobile user. It was, of course, achieved by offsetting the emission of their data centers. And I will come back to offsetting later on. And then a last thing that I want to mention in this part of the presentation is the importance of the more social factors. Because remember, I was talking about the 3 components of sustainability: better for me, better for the planet, but also better for society. So the social impact, the S of ESG. And in the top 10 spontaneous answers, we were, and also in your answers on the poll, we were all talking about eco-friendly, and not in the top 10 about equality, diversity, inclusivity. Now, I must say, when we looked in detail into the results, there is a big difference when we look at the younger generations and compare them to, for instance, the baby boomers. Let's have a look, for instance, at the results on this slide. When it comes to LGBTQIA+ rights, that is one of the top 5 ESG concerns in importance for Generation Z. But 0% of the baby boomers actually mentioned it as important to them. So you do see the difference, and the same goes for gender equality or fair wages. These social components are less obvious for the older generation in Australia, but they are crucial for the young generation. And an international example of this is Beiersdorf, who has the iconic Nivea brand, you know, the iconic blue tin, most known packaging of Nivea. That changed this tin 2 years during Pride by using the rainbow colors. And at first you would say, oh, that's pink washing or rainbow washing. But in their case, that's not really true, because they did it linked to something that they've been doing since 2002, so almost 20 years. There is a BU at Beiersdorf network in the headquarters of Beiersdorf that is promoting their employees to be themselves, whichever race or gender or LGBTQIA+ feelings they have. They have this network of people connecting with each other, which today is normal in many companies, but we're talking about 2002 here. So they have the heritage, they have the credibility, and the people you see around this tin are actually all employees of Beiersdorf. They use their own employees in their campaign to show we're not rainbow washing. We are deliberately choosing our most iconic product, which is not like a Gen Z product, but a product used by all generations, to make a statement. And to make the statement even more clear, this year they did a 2-day public pride festivals in which they invited celebrity guests, such as the famous drag queen star Olivia Jones. And they had a 2-day program of discussions and celebrities talking openly about how they discovered themselves and the difficulties they actually had by doing so. So this wraps up the first part of my presentation, the definition of sustainability and what does it mean to Australian consumers, and the true brand strategies. Let's go quickly into the next chapter, because I see I'm very enthusiastically talking a lot. So I will have to switch gears a bit. Now, when we look at consumers in Australia, what we see is that they are willing to change their own buying habits to have a positive impact on the environment. 60% is saying that. And again, we see a higher intention specifically among Gen X, 75%, and surprisingly, it was a bit lower among Gen Z, whereas we know Gen Z, the climate strikes at school, we always think of them as the most sustainable generation. and they are when it comes to activism and talking about sustainability. But when it comes to actions at home, yeah, some of them don't really have an impact, for instance, on the buying behavior. It's still their parents that are shopping. But it's really Gen X that is doing more sustainable actions. So let's have a look at what do consumers do in their own homes. And we asked in Australia, which of the following habits, and it was a long list, of course, but I will ask you 3 options, is the most popular sustainable conscious habit at the homes of Australians? Is it using up leftovers? Is it limiting water usage at home? Or is it refusing plastic bags? So again, you can still participate in the poll, poll.com/Joeri, Joeri, or scan the code, which is now already gone, and you will see this question. I will come back to your answer soon. Talking about plastic bags, plastic for a certain time was really the main demon, especially single-use plastics. So what we saw was many brands actually using that as a competitive advantage, a competitive strength in their strategy, often startups or challenger brands. For instance, in the pet food market in Australia, you had Swan creating healthy food for pets in completely compostable packaging made from sugar cane. So not in plastic packaging. And of course, also multinationals such as Coca-Cola are following, and Coca-Cola Amatil in Australia also is using our PET bottles today made from 100% recycled plastics using nice campaigns like this one.
With a little help, we can make a big change. Now made from 100% recycled plastic.
So yeah, that's an example. But let's have a look at your opinion in the poll. And to your opinion, it is the winner is refusing plastic bags in shops, and number 2 is using up leftovers. And not so many people actually voted for limiting water usage at home. But you can see that the difference was not that big. Number 1 was leftovers. Number 3 was actually refusing plastic bags. And then number 2 was limiting water usage at home. Maybe it's because the last summer was really a wet summer and you had the floods in Australia. But don't forget that there were 2 very dry summers before. And that water usage became more important, as you can also see in this graph, in just 1 year because of these dry summers in the end. There were brands like the Reckitt Benckiser brand, Finish, doing this campaign on Bondi Beach and this fantastic swimming pool you have over there. Who was actually engaging consumers to stop pre-rinsing their dishes before they put it in a dishwasher, saving in that way many billions of liters of water each year, and then matching this saving of water to donating water to Australians in need, working together with rural aid in the end. This was in 2020, but also in 2021. Another effect we see on the personal habits, COVID effect, is buying more local, supporting the local economy, buying seasonal, but also reducing energy use at home. If you're working more from home, if you're locked in at home, you see the energy bills going up as well. And of course, choosing holidays with train, cars, and buses, not that easy in a big country like Australia. But when you cannot travel intercontinentally, it becomes more clear that the staycation was the only option you had. But in general, it's a trend that we have seen since a number of years called reducitarians, consumers trying to reduce dairy products, but also meat products, waste, sugar, as a new trend. Also reducing consumption in general, so consuming less and trying to mend and repair things, giving it a second life or a third life. Think of refurbished items as well, becoming more important. In fashion, the re-commerce is the fastest growing retail business for the moment, growing much faster than traditional retail. A bit again driven by the young generation that is into thrifting and secondhand, which led to brands like Levi's starting up their own secondhand platform in return for gift cards and endorsing this secondhand platform with the voices of climate activists and celebrities. But also brands like Apple and IKEA have buyback programs in which they are stimulating their consumers to sell their furniture back to the company to get discounts on new furniture, to make sure that they're upcycled and that they're closing the loop again. Now, another thing you can see in this graph is everything that's related to meat. It is growing a little bit, as you can see. Almost 50% already of Australians are trying to eat less meat. And that brings me to the topic of meat and greed with a D and meat with EA. Again, we see some differences in generations, of course. Although many people know, as I've mentioned before, that your own eating habits have a big influence on the environment, we see that especially among Generation Z, there are more vegetarians. And the number of people not eating meat in Australia is already a quarter, 1 out of 4, which is not a small group. So it becomes more important. And of course, it's offer and demand again. So we increasingly see new brands popping up. We had the Impossible and Beyond burgers. But today there's also companies like Live Kindly Collective. I had the chance in the book scene, you will see it, to interview Case, who is the CEO of the Live Kindly Collective. It's a collective of brands investing in plant-based meat alternatives around the globe. And one of the insights he gave during the interview was most people are very habitual when it comes to eating. They have like their favorite 10 recipes that they are serving themselves all the time. So to really make a difference, to really change the habits of people, they need to create meat alternatives that are locally adapted to the most favorite recipes, you could say, which means that would be dim sums and dumplings in Asia, but it could be a replacement of a spaghetti meat, a bolognese in other parts. And it could be a replacement of a Caesar salad or tacos in other parts of the world. So it comes back to what are the habits of people when it comes to eating, and how can we just switch one main ingredient, that is a meat ingredient, into these 10 favorite meals to really have an impact. It's not only in food, by the way, that meat and animal products are becoming a problem or an opportunity. H&M has just launched its new vegan collection. It's even approved by the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, which you probably know. It's a quite active NGO organization. So they have this collection that is totally made of materials that have nothing to do with animals at all. And even in finance, you see challenger banks like Bank Australia. That is the first bank that is not lending money anymore to companies or organizations that are using intensive animal farming systems, whether it's in agriculture or fashion or whatever. Talking about fashion, let's go to the next poll question, and it's about this one. What do you think is the world's most sustainable fashion brand or sports brand? Do you think it's Adidas, or do you think it's Gucci? So what's the world's most sustainable fashion or sports brand, you think? Adidas or Gucci? While you're voting, there is a lot going on in the world of fashion, and so sustainability becomes more important to them, and also in the world of sports brands. Nike, for instance, has the Move to Zero sustainability mission, which you can see printed on every box of Nike products. So it's their mission to go to zero carbon as well as zero waste. And they're creating new products like this Nike Air, you can see, that is made from at least 50% of scrap waste material that they're reusing from other shoes. So the waste in the fabric, the scrap, is used to create new models, which are quite expensive, but very on trend, and as a new strategy of the company. So these are the votes coming in, and I can see that Adidas is the clear winner in your opinion, and Gucci, you think they're not so sustainable. Well, you're wrong, actually. Gucci is the world's most sustainable fashion corporation, and we're using the Corporate Knights Global 100 ranking, which is based on 24 different KPIs, again, coming from Better for the Planet, Better for You, and also Better for Society. And you can see that the Kering Group, so the parent company above Gucci, is number 7 in 2021 in the ranking, and Adidas is number 76. So it is a clear difference. And Gucci and Kering is actually been involved with becoming more sustainable for over 10 years. It's often not really in your face, but they're doing it to their stakeholders, to their shareholders. For instance, when you go to the Kering website, the conversation is all about sustainability. You will see what the share price is, but immediately you will see their EP&L. So it's a P&L, profit and loss, but it's an environmental profit and loss, in which for every product of Gucci, whether it's a handbag or a shoe or a jacket, you can see what the impact is on the planet, and they explain how they're lowering their impact on the planet, how they have left using fur, for instance, in their luxury fashion collection as well. So Gucci was the right answer. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is offsetting flights. I know that recently Matt, my colleague in Sydney, gave me this example. Qantas has launched a new flyer reward program, like a loyalty program specifically for green actions. And the novelty of this is that it goes beyond offsetting your flight. So it goes beyond flying. They're also stimulating you to have a more sustainable lifestyle. So you gain points by having solar panels at home. You gain points by walking instead of taking your car when you go to your work, if you can still work at the office, etc., etc. And it's a more holistic way of looking at how can we help our clients to live more sustainably. And that's really a problem because, as mentioned before, the intention is there. So many consumers are saying, also in Australia, we want to buy more purpose-driven brands, but the number of people doing it is quite low. And it's because there are some enemies of sustainability. And the main one is actually convenience. Convenience, as you can see, and ease. 53% of Australians say, if it would be more convenient and easy to buy sustainable brands, I would buy more sustainable. But even more important is it's too expensive. If it was cheaper, 61% of Australians would buy more sustainable options in the end. Some examples of how we can work on these barriers. This is again an Australian company, ZeroCo, that is creating sustainable home care products by using refills, for instance, that are in the end also cheaper than non-refills and cheaper than the non-sustainable alternatives. So as you can see on the slide, they're comparing their own price with the average supermarket price of competitors to showcase that it's not necessarily more expensive to go for more sustainable alternatives. Another barrier was accessibility. I don't know where to get more sustainable brands, or it's harder to get more sustainable brands. Well, you can work on that as well, which is what is Beauty Kitchen, a personal care brand, doing in the UK. They are also organizing refills, but they're putting these refill machines not only in their own stores, but also in train stations, in garden centers, in beauty salons, in major office complexes, university campuses, to make the barrier lower to refill your bottle near where you are at that moment. Combination of affordability and convenience and ease is good and fugly, which is bringing the ugly vegetables and fruits that get rejected from the grocery stores into a subscription curated box to your home, is delivered at your door. So it's convenient, it's more affordable because it's cheaper, and you're doing something good for the planet as well. And then an example of reminding and rewarding is this example, a reverse vending machine in Rome, where you dispose your used plastic bottle, your empty water bottle, into the vending machine, and you get credits on your travel card, on your metro card in the Rome metro system in the end. And then a last example is on how can we create more knowledge and educate our consumers. And this is an example of Procter Gamble.
Dear Earthlings, I, Louisa, explorer of galaxies, officially declare your planet my home. As your leader, I have one demand. With every action, you will take care of it. Under my watchful eye, resource conservation is vital. Energy shall be used wisely. Earthlings, shut the door in 3, 2. My beautiful planet will be respected, which may require sacrifices. Sorry, Mom. With your cooperation, we can secure a prosperous future for us all. On my planet, which is mine. Yours truly, Louisa.
So a corporate campaign of Procter & Gamble, but the main idea was to educate their clients and consumers that have a big impact on their own, on the planet, with their own behavior, with their products, through this engaging commercial. And the real success factor was Louisa, actually, because that's one of the reasons why we would engage in more sustainable behavior. Is we are not doing it for ourselves, but we're doing it for our children who still have to live on the planet for many, many years. And that brings me to the last book I will mention. It's called The Green Bundle. I know Erica is also a big fan of this book, a book of UCLA professor Magali Delmas, who says that, listen, if you're doing sustainability branding, you should keep in mind that you're not just talking to the eco-actives or the eco-activists who want to buy more sustainable products, even if it's more expensive. No, you want to address the majority, the mainstream consumer markets, who can still be seen as convenient environmentalists, which means they like to talk about living more sustainably, but there are some barriers that I've just mentioned. So a way to work with this is to bundle actually the more sustainable option with extra benefits that could be on your personal image. I'm doing this for my children, so I feel better, but it could also be, it has a performance that is at least as good as the non-sustainable alternative. Or even better, if you think of Tesla, for instance, as a sustainable alternative, it's a car that's much faster than other cars. So it gives this extra benefit to that segment of the market, for which this is an interesting claim. So we talked in the second part about the conscious mindset, about reducitarians, the say-do gap and difference between a mindset and habits, about convenience, that is the main enemy of sustainability, and also about what we need to do as brands, educate and remind people, and also work on the green bundle, whether it's more accessible, more easy, rewarding, and more affordable. And now we come to the last part before we go into the Q&A, and it's about the business case. Why do we want to be involved with sustainable branding? Well, we do believe that good business is good business, and we've assembled some evidence for that. Also in our own research, we see that Australians say that sustainable brands are more up to date, and even half of them has the idea that a sustainable brand has a higher quality. Whether it's the case or not, it's not necessarily the case. It is kind of a halo effect, you could say, on your brand if you're involved with sustainability claims. You can also see that this amount is really increasing a lot in the past years. There is other evidence from the NYU Stern University that shows a difference between brands that are not involved with sustainability claims and those, the purple bars, who are actually marketing sustainability claims. And these bars, the first 7 ones, by the way, they're topped off. It's not 150%. You can see the right percentage at the right side of the screen. It goes up to more than 1,000% difference, 900%, etc., for some categories. So yes, the brands that are using sustainability claims in all of these different grocery items are winners for the moment. So the first real benefit of sustainable branding is creating consumer preference or consumer awareness if you're a challenger brand. And again, it comes to competitive advantage over there. Tony Chocolonely, for instance, in the chocolate market, is starting from the Netherlands, growing to become a major player in the chocolate industry by emphasizing the fact that it's slavery-free chocolate. And even in the product, you can see that it has uneven parts, which is a competitive differentiator or a distinctive asset, you could say, of the brand, because they want to stress the fact that the wages in the sector, in the chocolate industry, are not evenly or not equally spread. So this slavery in the industry and the farmer wages, the social component, is really the competitive difference for Tony Chocolonely. And you can see in the chocolate market, these are Nielsen figures, not our own figures, that although the total chocolate market is growing, especially in a crisis, we eat more chocolate to have a more comfortable feeling. The ones who are doing better for the planet, better for you by reducing artificial ingredients or having fair trade claims, are really growing much faster than the chocolate brands that don't have any of these 3 components of sustainable branding. So yes, you should do it to create more awareness and to create preference. The second reason to do it is your license to play, your license to operate, and your image, your reputation. 1/4 of Australians have already boycotted a brand for sustainability reasons. And again, you see that it's growing a lot recently. And again, it's not the baby boomers. It is the younger generation, specifically millennial consumers. 41% of millennials in Australia have claimed in our research that they have already boycotted a brand. And the main reasons are it has too much plastics in the packaging, or it's not recycling, or they're not involved with LGBT+ rights, or it's something with animal welfare or meat inside. These are the main reasons in Australia. So another reason is not only the consumer that gets more educated, but of course also if you don't do it, NGOs will actually talk about your brand if you're not sustainable and ruin your brand image. As this is an example of a campaign of Greenpeace in front of the Mattel headquarters in the US. So that's definitely also a reason. And the third reason is it can be a growth strategy as well. It can create relevant new innovations or new markets for you. And one example there is 7-Eleven, the convenience stores, which is normally a quick stop for drivers. They thought, okay, if we are claiming that we also provide charging stations in North America for the ones driving electric cars, we can say it's a quick stop for recharging your car and also for recharging yourself by buying some food or buying some drinks when you pass by our convenience store. So they actually went into a new market to them to attract a new type of customer, but also offering new services like providing this energy to EV drivers. And then the last reason is, of course, employee engagement. We all know that there's a war, a battle going on for talent. We know that we're talking about the global resignation also as a result of the pandemic. People are reevaluating the meaning of their job and the purpose of their employer. And so it's not only for millennials anymore and for the young generation, but a reason to choose an employer can be what are they doing actually for the planet and for society at large. And then the last thing I want to share with you before we have the Q&A is everything that's related to communicating about sustainability, because I know it's really a hassle and often it's a barrier for many companies. Too often I hear companies saying, you know, we have been investing for 15 years in becoming more sustainable, in changing our packaging, our ingredients, our factories, our CO2 emission, but we won't talk about it. And I would say, well, that's amazing. You're investing 15 years of money and you don't talk about it. You're not using it commercially. And I say, no, because we're afraid that if we talk about it, that we will be attacked, that there is still some plastics in the packaging, or we're not zero emission, or we are not carbon positive yet. So we don't talk about it until we are really there, which for many companies means by 2030 or 2025 or 2040 even. So that means investing like 40 years without talking about it, which is the wrong strategy, to be clear, because what we see in our research is that the majority of consumers say if brands are not talking about sustainability, it means they're not sustainable. So it's a big mistake to not talk about it. But it is true that you should be careful how you talk about it. So the first golden rule, I would say, is talk about a long-term commitment. Why? If you only talk about what you're doing today and not talk about what you want to achieve in the long term, it could be seen as greenwashing or rainbow washing. Think again about the example of Nivea and the rainbow colors. If you would only do that in 2020, and you don't talk about, these are our LGBT employees, and we have this group of people inside our company for 20 years, then people would say, why are you putting the colors now on the packaging? That's just a commercial strategy. So it's clear that you have to talk about your real commitments, your engagement in the long term, to avoid being seen as a green washer or a pink washer or a black washer or a rainbow washer. And this is an example of Volvo. Volvo is talking about, of course, the electrification in their industry. And you can see the timeline at the bottom side of this slide, talking about what they're doing today, but also what the plan is by 2025 and by 2030. And also they're using these great campaigns, Volvos are rubbish, to not only talk about electrification, but also using recycled plastics in the interior of cars, for instance. Now, it's not only enough to talk about the long term, because if you do that, and you see the main frustration along consumers today is that brands are talking too much about tomorrow and not about what they're doing today. So you should also talk about what you're doing today. And a good example of that is the Heineken brewery that has been working for 10 years on using more renewable energy in the production of their beers. And last year, they actually achieved the milestone in which they were able to brew all their beers with 100% green energy. And they did this out of home poster campaign you can see to the left side of the slide, in which they even call it their newest ingredients, the 100% green energy, to celebrate the achievement, to celebrate that major milestone. Then transparency is, of course, also important, because if you're not transparent about the commercial motives, then you will be attacked again by NGOs and by consumers. So it's the reason why Unilever, for instance, said when they were launching their ideas on plant-based alternatives, in the press release, the first bullet was all about the annual sales that they were expecting from plant-based meat and dairy alternatives, even before the bullet points that are about better for the planet and better for your nutrition for yourself. So be open about the commercial motives as well. That's also quite important. I see that my time is running up, so I will have to skip some slides to make sure that we have time for the Q&A. One of the important things is that consumers should be allowed to track and trace your ingredients. And one of the main challenges is that there are so many different eco-labels that consumers get confused. And when we ask them in Australia, what do you check the most on packaging, which we call flip side shopping, you see that where products are coming from is quite important in Australia. Locally produced product origins was the #1 answer. And especially in Australia, this local aspect becomes more important. It's the reason that Coles Local, for instance, the most sustainable supermarkets, are talking about supporting Aussie farms first. It's also something we see at fast service restaurants like Grilled, for instance, always talking about the 100% Australian ingredients. Even the pickles on your burger come from a farm in Australia as well. And then natural is also something that is growing a lot. And again, Grilled is also working on that with 100% natural burgers in the end. And then the last example is keeping your brand's tone of voice. Too often when brands communicate about sustainability, they are using only LinkedIn, for instance, as a channel, or using the PR agency instead of using their normal communication channels. So that is important as well. So summing up this last part, 4 rules to communicate and the 4 benefits of sustainable branding. Thanks a lot. And we will now move into the Q&A, I guess, Erica.
Thank you, Joeri, for a great summary of many issues. There's been a lot of questions popped into the chat there and some super interesting ones that we're going to have to move through quite quickly. It's such a challenge to solve for sustainability commercially. And just before we jump into those answers, knowing how complex it is, we just want to share a couple of simple examples about how you can think about trying to connect in this area. And we tend to look at it around empathy, relevance, and experience, and really trying to understand consumers across that those 3 aspects of really deep diving into consumers. So when we're talking about how well can we connect and understand, how relevant is the challenge that we're doing, and how do we understand the experience. So one example where we've done that is working with brands to really conduct in-depth conversations, understanding the empathy, to work out what are the opportunities for brands to solve with their customers. This can be at a consumer level or at a customer level. And especially in FMCG products, it's often very important to get to a deep understanding of what are stakeholders doing in companies that you're servicing. How do we solve things to create more sustainable supply chains? We often find in this area that there's a size effect. So bigger companies have more complex systems that they're already moving to solve the puzzle with, but smaller companies are struggling to find a pathway there. So large companies often find they have to nuance how they react. looking at education and communication so that they can play significant roles to help solve the challenges of their customers. In relevance, we've worked with clients to set up what we call pop-up qual communities, qual at scale. And in this way, you can target consumer groups across both different kinds of consumers, obviously the ones who are prepared to pay more and some that are not, obviously, as well as businesses to help understand what are their challenges and how do we implement change. This kind of work can give you really rich insights into what consumers and customers are thinking. What are they trading off? Because at the heart of many of the challenges we all have is how do we make sustainability convenient? What do we need to do? And there's some questions in the chat to that topic as well. And the last one I want to touch on is also understanding experience. So really thinking about tracking consumers' perceptions of brands in your category to understand how are people thinking about sustainability in my category? What are they thinking about my brand? And are our communications having an impact? Have we got the mix right? Are we combining the trade-offs in a way that's allowing people to connect and make a difference for our brand? So we know it's complex. That's why we're so invested in trying to help you solve those problems. And I'll just leave you all with one last comment. If not now, when? Let's all get on board. Let's make a change. Let's all be part of the change. Thanks for joining and have a great day.